So where is she?
She's over there. There she is.
May 23rd, 1979.
Can I get your name for the record?
James Miller.
And 38-year-old James William Miller is back in an interrogation room at the South Australian Police Headquarters.
And James, your date of birth?
February 2nd, 1940.
The dramatisation you're about to see is based on information gathered by police in numerous interviews.
Any questions or answers that you give can be recorded and used in court as evidence. You agree with that?
Yeah.
The story unravelling in this secure room will shock the state to its core and is the culmination of a killing spree that began nearly 2.5 years earlier.
Look, I had nothing to do with the murders.
Did you?
Okay, I got in the car and drove, but no, I didn't do anything like that.
It's late December 1976, and 18-year-old Veronica Knight is doing some last-minute shopping before travelling to Melbourne for the holiday break. Sadly, she's the product of a tough childhood, and she's looking forward to getting away from all the turmoil and starting a new life.
Her father was alcoholic. Her mother died shortly after her birth. She was taken from the father because of his deep alcoholism. She was put into various foster homes and Salvation Army homes. And she was what was classified as environmentally retarded. She was not a simpleton or anything like that. She was just held back in her education because of her lifestyle and the way she was brought up.
So tell us about the first girl that you picked up.
Well, we were just driving around and Chris got out for a bit of a walk and...
So you're gonna get a lift with us, yeah?
I suppose if you're going that way.
Yeah, of course.
I just kept driving around the block and that, and when I got back, we were together, and so they both just hopped in and we went for a drive.
All right, come on.
And where did you drive to?
We drove up to Windy Point.
A brief time later, Worrell and Miller decide it's time to move on.
Yeah, just keep going, Dad.
Yeah, okay.
The car speeds through the night further away from Adelaide. At the wheel, James Miller's heart is racing as he concentrates intently on the dark road ahead. In the rear passenger seat, Christopher Worrell is making crude advances to Veronica Knight.
Come on, I bet you like it. Just relax.
I'd like to get out now.
Take it easy.
It's now obvious that there's something sinister about the man sitting beside her. Several kilometres outside the township of Truro, the vehicle veers sharply off the highway into Swamp Road, deeper into the countryside. there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
Yeah, just make a right here.
Look at Jordan, Chris.
Take your time, Jim.
Where's he going? Is he coming back?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Get off me! No! Please! Don't say anything! Ah!
Worrell's mood takes a dramatic U-turn. He attacks without warning.
Get back.
Veronica struggles valiantly, but Worrell pins her down, tying her up with coarse rope.
No one's gonna hear.
Her screams are in vain. No longer can she ward off her assailant. Veronica Knight is raped before being throttled to death on the back seat of the car.
How long were you away for?
Oh, came back after about 20 minutes and she was on the back seat.
Was she dead?
Yeah. You know, I got real angry with him and shouted at him and he pulls his knife on me.
Just keep your mouth shut, you bloody poof. Do what I say. And everything will be all right.
He says if I don't help him, he was going to do me in as well. So we put the body out near some trees and you know, we threw some branches and twigs and shit on it.
Then, as quickly as they arrived, James Miller and Christopher Worrell are gone. The silence of the night is the only eerie witness to the gruesome crime.
She was reported missing within the next 24 hours. Everyone thought, oh, maybe she tried to hitchhike to Melbourne. They made these assumptions, and the reported missing person file just, in the end, got shelved. Everyone gave up looking for Veronica.
So he didn't always get rough with them?
At police headquarters, detectives continue to interrogate James Miller.
I just thought this was a bit of an accident, you know.
He tells them that Veronica Knight's murder is just the start of a sickening saga.
Do you remember Tanya?
Yeah.
James Miller insists that he's not responsible for any of the events you're about to see, but police believe he's lying to protect himself and that he's played a much greater role than he's ever willing to admit. The facts are undeniable, but the whole truth may never be known.
February 2nd, 1940.
Okay, now you...
James Miller is being questioned by detectives about a series of gruesome murders involving girls who vanished off the streets of Adelaide.
About 20 minutes.
Doesn't have to. You don't have to do this.
Miller already has told police the shocking details of 18-year-old Veronica Knight's murder almost 2 years earlier.
Hey.
Oh, behind that tree there, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
10 days later, Worrell and Miller are cruising Adelaide, checking out girls at railway stations, bus stops and hotels.
Hey, check that one out there, mate. Put your smile out.
Teenager Tanya Kenny is in town and is about to fall victim to the seemingly irresistible charms of Chris Worrell.
Tanya came from a very good home. She went down to stay with friends down south of Adelaide just after Christmas, and she came back to Adelaide on the 2nd of January, which was the day I think New Year's Day was held.
I dropped him off at Rundle Mall and, you know, went for a bit of a drive and I met him at the other end of the mall and he was there with his girl.
And she just got into the car?
Yeah, she just hopped in and we went for a drive to my sister's old joint. So what are you doing?
Just caught a ride up here from a place near Victor Harbour.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Have you been there?
Yeah, all the time. Get out there and we get around.
Tanya Kenny is driven to an unoccupied house in the suburb of Woodville.
What are you doing up there?
Oh, I'm just
Yeah, we won't be too long. We'll just pick up the clothes and leave, yeah?
Miller stays in the car as Worrell takes the teenager inside where, without warning, he attacks her.
He tells us he heard a bit of a scream, stifled scream, and after a while he went inside and found that Chris had apparently strangled Tanya. He said that she had a rather sharp-looking line around her neck,
She was on the floor.
which indicated maybe he'd used a guitar string or something similar.
It's still daylight, and so Worrell and Miller lock the house and leave the body inside. They return after dark, put the body in the boot, and drive to Wingfield, a northern suburb of Adelaide, and bury the body in a shallow grave that they'd purposely dug earlier in the day. When Tanya fails to return home that night, her parents believe she might have stayed overnight with a friend. The next day, they begin to worry and contact police. 2 girls have now disappeared without trace from the streets of Adelaide in a little more than a week, but police inquiries find nothing to connect either disappearance. During the next 3 weeks, Miller and Worrell continue to prowl the streets. In the late 70s, Adelaide is still considered by its citizens to be a safe city. 16-year-old Julie Makita is the product of a loving family. Her parents are teachers and well-versed in the theatre.
But we did trust all our children in terms of their friendships. We felt that the values that they got from us would keep them safe.
When Julie Makita finishes work, she calls her parents to tell them that she'll be late getting home. At about 9 p.m, she's waiting for a bus outside a hotel here in King William Street. Suddenly, Julie's approached by a young man who engages her in conversation.
Well, you're going in that direction.
Yeah. Give you a lift, yeah. You can hop in next to him or something, whatever you like.
He brought her over to the car and she said her name was Julie, I think.
We're going down that way, saves you trouble. Yeah?
Guess so.
Well, anyway, she hopped in the car and Chris said we were just going to give her a lift.
Miller drives to a secluded spot off the Port Wakefield Road.
I pulled the car over and went for a walk. Well, it was a long drive up there, so when I pulled the car over, I got out and I went for a walk.
Please.
Worrell forces Julie into the back seat and ties her hands, but she doesn't give way without a struggle. Somehow, she escapes from the car and momentarily flees into the paddock. Miller claims he returned and tried to drag Worrell away from Julie Makita.
Chris, no, I'm a get away, Rock, you shoot.
As Miller watches on, Christopher Worrell holds the terrified girl down and strangles her.
Well, we put a body back in the car and drove up past Truro and to that spot that I showed you. And when we just put her on the ground and cover her with branches.
So the afternoon of that day was the last time we saw her alive, because when I got up the next morning, I found that she wasn't home. I was angry. I was angry because she hadn't rung. I was angry because it was very much unlike her to do that sort of thing.
By midday, when there's no contact with his daughter, Mick Makita begins calling Julie's friends and Adelaide hospitals. But all of his frantic queries result in dead ends. He then turns to the police for help.
I got the usual story of I had $1 for every worrying parent whose child hasn't come home for a while. I'd be a rich man and all that sort of thing. So they didn't really take us seriously, but I think by the third day we knew that something was very, very seriously wrong.
Chris was getting crazier. He was getting out of control.
As detectives continue to interrogate Miller, cracks emerge in his version of events.
He would have killed me as well if I tried to stop him or if I told anyone.
You bloody fool! You want to ruin everything?
Miller's account of his actual involvement in the killing of the girls and how 2 of the first 3 victims came to be dumped out at Truro just doesn't add up.
It's just isolated, it's remote, and it's a perfect killing field. And Miller was the one who had knowledge of that area.
By the end of January 1977, the fate of Veronica Knight, Tanya Kenny and Julie Makita remains unknown. They are listed as missing persons, but there is no evidence to suggest foul play. Worrell and Miller have not come under notice, and they continue cruising the streets looking for young women. It's the 6th of February, and near Adelaide Station, Christopher Worrell approaches 16-year-old Sylvia Pittman.
Hey, how are
Yeah.
you? Waiting for the train?
Yeah.
It's another 30 minutes. Do you want us to give you a lift? My dad's right there in that car.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Like the other victims, Sylvia Pittman doesn't stand a chance.
What's your name, by the way?
Sylvia?
Chris. So do you live
Chris,
around here?
well, you came back with her.
Go back 20 minutes.
She jumped in and we drove up to Wingfield. Chris told me to get out of the car, so for a while, I left the mare and went for a walk. I'll leave you two guys to a day, Chris.
Where are you going?
Come on, it'll be fun.
What? Don't! Get off me! Don't! Don't! Leave me alone, please!
Suddenly, Worrell snaps, unable to control his violent tendencies, and launches himself at the terrified girl.
Don't! Off me!
Worrell overpowers her, and she's raped before being strangled on the back seat of the car.
Bitch.
How long did you go for a walk for?
Oh, it's gone about 20, maybe 30 minutes. When I got back, she was dead.
And then you drove the body to Truro?
Yeah. Or Chris made me drive to Truro. You know, we got rid of the body, and, pretty much right near where we dumped that first girl.
Like the others, Sylvia's family reports her missing.
You obviously try and find out as much as you can and empathise with the family. Sometimes I think you take on board some of the pain the family's feeling.
Stop it!
They'd gone to huge extent to find their daughter that was missing. You could feel their pain.
4 young women have now been murdered in the space of just 6 weeks, and the alarm still hasn't sounded. Police, the public, and the families of the missing girls have no idea that 2 killers are loose in the city. Within 24 hours of Sylvia Pittman's murder, and with seemingly no one to stop them, James Miller and Christopher Worrell embark on a killing frenzy that dramatically escalates out of control. The tiny hamlet of Truro in South Australia is about 1 hour northeast of Adelaide on the Sturt Highway, linking up with the city of Mildura in New South Wales. In early 1977, the residents are blissfully unaware that the nearby barren fields and paddocks hold shocking secrets. Ultimately, when the secrets are unearthed, the town will gain notoriety for all of the wrong reasons. And Truro will be recorded indelibly in the annals of Australian crime. 23-year-old Christopher Worrell and 38-year-old James Miller are known to South Australian police. Worrell has spent time in prison for armed robbery and rape. James Miller's record of petty crime stretches back to his teenage years when he was in and out of institutions and reformatories. Miller was christened Melvin Raymond Juss. He changed his name to James Miller, which significantly is the same as the founding father of Truro. Over the next 20 years, he's in prison more than he's out. Miller and Worrell are an odd couple who first meet while serving time in Adelaide jail.
I think it's undeniable that Chris had a hold over Miller as a lover.
Bloody fool! Do you want to ruin everything?
Just keep your mouth shut, you bloody fool.
Chris has been known as the slut of Yatala. So no matter how much Miller denied about his sexual relationship with Chris, it is obvious that it was a strong sexual relationship. In that sense, you could say that Worrell may have had some sort of a hold over Miller. They lived in various locations, always together, shared the same accommodation, sometimes slept in the car together. They shared their work life together, they shared their personal life, and it seemed that they were almost inseparable.
Criminologist Alan Perry will later conduct an independent assessment of both men.
She got in.
Everything about Miller's background suggests a passive, inadequate, mildly sociopathic personality. Someone who found it difficult to form relationships with others. Worrell, on the other hand, had a much briefer antecedent history because he was much younger than Miller, but his history reflects a very violent, unstable personality. Worrell had the capacity to love anyone, whereas Miller, in his own sort of perverted and distorted way, I think actually thought he was in love with Worrell.
Within 24 hours of 16-year-old Sylvia Pittman's murder on the evening of February 7th, Worrell instructs Miller to meet him outside the Adelaide post office. When he arrives, Worrell is with 26-year-old Vicky Howell.
Oh, I thought Chris liked this one. He liked her a lot more than the other ones.
Her background is checkered. She had been through an unhappy marriage. She was in a relationship which was not exactly the best at the time. She was going through a disturbing period of her life.
Where did you pick up Vicky?
Well, I got a phone call from Chris, and he said, come pick him up at about 7 o'clock at the post office. So when I got there, Vicky was there, and they seemed to be getting on pretty well. You know, she was a nice girl.
Half an hour's drive out of Adelaide along the Barossa Valley Highway, a few kilometres past Nooriupta, Worrell instructs Miller to pull over.
So I pulled over and went off to take a piss. And they were getting on pretty good in the back seat, so I left it to them.
Wait.
Left alone with Vicky Howell, Christopher Worrell turns on the girl in a sudden explosion of violence. She fights desperately for her life. He tears off her pantyhose and wraps them tightly around her neck. Then, as he tightens his grip, he moves in closer, staring intently into his victim's eyes as she begins to choke. It's the last thing Vicky Howell will ever see, a terrible blackness closing in on her.
And when you got back, she was dead.
Well, when I got back, he was covering her with a blanket. You know, he told me to get in the car and drive. So, yeah, drove it to Truro and get rid of the body.
By now, Christopher Worrell is completely out of control, having committed 2 murders within 24 hours. James Miller cannot or will not do anything to stop Worrell, and the Truro body count continues to escalate.
The gap between them gets less and less, suggesting that the satisfaction that he was getting from these killings was lasting for a shorter and shorter period of time.
While family members and friends search in vain for the missing girls, police remain unaware of the gravity of the crime. 2 days after Vicky Howell is killed, 16-year-old Connie Jordan, known to her friends as Connie Jordan, is picked up in the middle of the city. The story Miller tells police almost defies belief.
We were driving around and we got pulled over by the cops.
What for?
You know, a defect notice or something. Well, anyway, there was this bird walking past and, you know, Chris couldn't keep his eyes off her. So after the cops pissed off, he gets me to do this U-turn. He starts chatting her up. Before I knew it, she was in a car.
We'll just go for a bit of a drive of the road, eh?
Yeah, we'll give it a run.
I left him in the car with her. Mate, he was just this completely different person. I couldn't do anything. He would have killed me if I'd done anything.
Inside the car, the terrified girl is fighting for her life. But the teenager is no match for Chris Worrell. Just like the others before her, Connie Jordan is raped, then strangled.
Please don't.
Connie Jordan is the 5th victim to be buried outside Truro. There have now been 6 murders in as many weeks. Each of the victims has been savagely killed, and seemingly nothing can stop Miller and Worrell from killing again. 3 days after Connie Jordan's murder, James Miller and Christopher Worrell are back searching for another victim. It's the early hours of Sunday morning, February the 12th.
Chris saw this girl walking along. So he got me to pull over and he offered her a lift and she got in.
Hey, would you like a lift?
No, I'm okay, thanks.
Come on, we're heading the same way. Just hop in, we'll give you a lift. It's quite late. Yeah?
Okay, yeah. Thanks.
This time, instead of going to Truro, Miller drives to a secluded beach at Port Gawler. Deborah Lamb's murder is by far the most horrifying of all. Christopher Worrell drags her from the car, forces himself onto her, ties her up, and stuffs a gag in her mouth. Her pantyhose are wound tightly around her neck. and she begins to choke. She's then dragged into a sandy culvert where Worrell piles dirt and sand over her body. It will later be revealed that Deborah Lamb was literally buried alive.
Oh, there's my dad there, so just hop in, yeah? Okay. All right, come on.
On the 23rd of December 1977, 18-year-old Veronica Knight is driven to the farmlands of Truro. After she's murdered, her body is dumped and hidden beneath twigs and branches. During the next several weeks, 6 more girls fall to the same fate, targets of a monster who spends his nights trawling the streets for prey. With him, his friend and accomplice, who claims he's been threatened with violence and is unable to stop him. 4 of the victims have been murdered in as many days, and it now seems inevitable that more are about to die. That is, until fate intervenes. On a Saturday afternoon in February 1977, Christopher Worrell and James Miller have another young woman in their car. Deborah Skuse is known to Worrell and accepts a lift back to Adelaide with the pair. En route, the vehicle spins out of control. Christopher Worrell and Deborah Skuse are killed. James Miller walks away with a broken shoulder. This time, Worrell had been at the wheel. Days later, at Worrell's funeral, Miller confides to Worrell's then-girlfriend about the girls having been done in. After Worrell's death, James Miller, the only other person to know what really happened, goes to ground. For months on end, parents live in hope that their daughters will call or find their way home. There are times when it seems their prayers are being answered, only to be cruelly dashed.
Again, I saw a couple of girls walking down the street, and one of them could have been Julie. I ran after them. I had, fortunately, enough presence of mind to keep running rather than stop and grab the girl, because I probably would have been arrested, but of course it wasn't Julie.
About 14 months after Christopher Worrell is killed, Veronica Knight's body is found by William Thomas and his wife, who are looking for mushrooms in a paddock next to Swamp Road, north of Truro. At first, they think the bones are of a dead animal. Thomas's wife, though, convinces him to go back and have a second look.
When Mum had a very restless sleep, she couldn't sleep and she was getting premonition that someone was calling her back to go back there, which she ignored initially. The next night the same thing happened. This feeling was so strong that they were compelled to go back, which is an hour's drive. So they went back there and they found the shoe and the bone again, and they looked carefully this time and the whole foot was still in the shoe. And then they knew it was a human.
He also finds a skull and items of clothing. Police converge on the scene and summon detectives from Adelaide. The body is believed to be a teenage girl, but due to the state of the remains, police are unsure how she came to be there or how she died.
Her scattered remains were collected up and brought back to Adelaide from Swamp Road at Truro. Nature up there is very harsh, very hot, very dry. If she wandered off the road, she could have easily become disorientated and died of thirst.
Dental records confirm that the victim is 18-year-old Veronica Knight. At the time, the discovery of Veronica Knight's scattered remains in this remote field north of Truro in 1978 receives little, if almost no, publicity. However, what police and the public don't know is that Veronica's death is soon to become very big news indeed, as the fields begin to give up their dark and sinister secrets. Over the preceding year, there's a drop in the number of young women and girls reported missing in Adelaide, but there's still nothing to connect the earlier disappearances. That's until Detective Ken Thorson receives a report from an officer who thinks he might have found a connection.
And so I went through them all with him and came to the same conclusion that there was a strong possibility that there was a pattern of serious crimes.
Based on this information, police convinced the family of missing teenager Julie Makita to make a renewed appeal for information.
We were the only ones that were willing, so we went public. We went on television, radio, Women's Weekly, Women's Day, everything possible.
However, police efforts go unrewarded, and soon the investigation goes cold. Then, almost a year later, bushwalkers stumble across the body of 16-year-old Sylvia Pittman. Her remains are discovered within a kilometre of where Veronica Knight's body was found.
The difference between Knight's body and Pittman's was that Knight's body was found within 100 metres of the swamp road, and Pittman's body was more than half a kilometre in from the road. It was obvious that someone must have driven in there to dispose of that body.
With two bodies found in roughly the same location, the alarm bells start ringing and the police reopen the files on the missing girls.
When the second one was found, it seemed logic that other bodies may well have been dumped in the Truro area, and we decided then that we would start a search of the area to see if any other bodies were up there.
A year later, in April 1979, a second body found in the same area.
Police converge on the sites, and it's not long before the investigators' worst fears are realised. On the opposite side of Swamp Road, a skull belonging to a third victim is found.
When it was first spotted, it was quite open to us. It's amazing how you can see that you talk about the forest and the trees, and I can remember the skull sitting up and looking and thinking, how didn't we see that first up?
A fourth body is found nearby, and police now know that they've stumbled on the work of a serial killer.
It looked like a serial killing at that stage, probably. You have to expect that a serial killer has habits that they tend to follow. They find an area where they think it's safe to dump the bodies, becomes almost ritualistic.
Within hours of the discovery of the third and fourth victims, the media descends on Truro.
What's the next step, Inspector? The crime scene, people will go through and minutely examine both scenes. We're continuing with our broad line search to eliminate totally the areas that we intended to initially.
The two newly discovered bodies are in an advanced state of decomposition. Again, police rely on dental records to identify the victims. The remains are those of Connie Jordan and Vicky Howell. All of the victims have been found partially buried in the same area, and investigators now believe that Veronica is the first of the girls to have been murdered. Police have no doubt that a serial killer's responsible, but they have few clues to work with. Weeks go by and the murder investigation stalls. Police are puzzled as to why the murders suddenly stopped.
It didn't take us long to realise that we had a start to it, which was basically a point in time, then there appeared to be an acceleration, then a stop. And of course, the obvious conclusion is, why did it stop?
Among the thousands of leads police look at is a report about the death of former prison inmate Christopher Worrell. Worrell fits the profile of a violent sex offender and was killed in a car accident at about the same time that the killings stopped. Police appealed to the public for information, and just weeks into their investigation, a major breakthrough. A person calls detectives claiming to know the killer's identity.
Some member of the public had heard from someone else that someone had been raping girls and dumping them up near Blanchetown.
Police trace the information back and discover that the story came from James Miller, and he'd told it to a former girlfriend of Chris Worrell after Worrell had died.
Given what she was able to tell us, it was obvious that the two persons we were looking at on the accident files, Christopher Worrell and James William Miller, were the two people we wanted.
An undercover police surveillance team tracks down James Miller. He's arrested and brought here to the offices of the South Australian Major Crime Squad. At first, Miller denies any involvement in the murders, but then he begins to crack, and the horrifying details are finally revealed.
I didn't murder those girls in the paddock. I know who did. I only drove him around with those girls. I had nothing to do with those murders.
Major Crime Squad detectives have arrested 38-year-old James William Miller, and they're questioning him about the murders of 7 young women. At first, he denies everything, but soon the trickle of information becomes a torrent.
Now, James, we have received some information that implicates you and at least one other person in the murder of at least 4 girls.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Do you remember any conversations that you had at Christopher Worrell's funeral?
Miller says his friend Christopher Worrell is solely responsible for all of the killings. He tells detectives that Worrell had satanic moods, silent and brooding one minute, and then he'd snap the next. 4 bodies have been found at Truro, but 3 others have yet to be discovered. At this point in the interrogation, Glenn Laurie decides it's time to charge James Miller.
So they took him down to the charge room, and I reckon within a few minutes Glenn came to my office and he said, "Guess what?" And my immediate reaction was, "Gee, don't tell me he's run away." But I said, "What's happened?" And he said, "We got him to the cell doors," and he said, "I'll show you where the other bodies are."
Detectives are elated. Despite Miller's admissions during his questioning, up until now, police have had no solid evidence to link him with the murders. It's now 10:30 at night, and James Miller is driven under police escort to Truro.
5 kilometres past Swamp Road on the left-hand side, down about 1.5 kilometres. He got us to turn into an old disused farmhouse.
So where is she?
Over there.
For Miller to lead us to that in the middle of the night, he had to be reasonably familiar with that area.
There she is.
Detectives establish a crime scene while Miller is driven back towards the city. By now, the media realises that a major story is breaking.
It was becoming quite clear that the police knew something was more, that there was more activity up at Truro.
Next, James Miller takes detectives to an isolated beach at Port Gawler where Deborah Lamb is buried.
It's an area with which a lot of people visit, but there's tracks leading in all over the place. It's like a network of little tracks running everywhere, and If I went there today, I would be totally lost again.
In the darkness, the exact location of Deborah Lamb's gravesite is not easy to find. As police begin a detailed search, detectives drive James Miller to Wingfield, where he shows police where he and Christopher Worrell disposed of 15-year-old Tanya Kenny's body. Her skeleton is found at the Dean Rifle Range, at the end of a dirt track leading to the target mound. Back at Port Gawler, Mick O'Reilly is with one of the searching police officers when he bends down to examine what looks like a burial plot.
And there was what appeared to be a little bit of fabric showing there, and he felt this fabric. And he just looked at me, we're probably about a foot apart, he looked at me and he mouthed the words, tibia, fibia, oh my God, here's a body.
Most of Deborah's clothing is found intact with her remains. Underneath her skeleton, police find a small yellow plastic badge showing 2 children within a heart. After 2 hours of meticulous digging, police lift the skeleton from the grave almost intact. It's almost dawn when James Miller is driven back to police headquarters and formally charged with the 7 murders. When he appears here in the South Australian Supreme Court, James Miller is charged with 7 counts of murder. He pleads not guilty. There's huge public interest, and the courtroom is packed to overflowing every day. On March the 12th, 1980, Miller is found guilty on 6 counts, but not guilty of the murder of the first victim, Veronica Knight. For his part in each of the murders, he is given 6 life sentences. When he's due for parole in 2014, James Miller will be 74.
I think the sentence that the judge gave was what he has to do in circumstances such as this. The only parts that concern me is parole periods. Well, it would appear at this stage that the state government here in South Australia are bringing in legislation that will enable them to keep people who they consider to be a danger to the community in prison indefinitely.
Serious questions remain in spite of Miller's detailed confessions. All of his recollections point squarely to Worrell as the sole culprit in the series of murders. In Miller's book, Don't Call Me Killer, he brazenly brags of his fighting ability and claims he beat bigger bullies when he was in the McGill Reformatory.
You have to realise that someone who has such pride in his prowess as a fighter, he's not going to be controlled by some insignificant little wimpish person.
To many, it's inconceivable that Miller remained meekly mute when opportunities arose for him to report on Worrell's attacks before the death toll escalated. Both had been picked up, had their car searched, and were questioned by police for suspected break and enters in the Woodville area early on in their murderous spree.
So if Miller had wanted to, he could have reported this to the police then, because at least one of the girls was already dead, if not 2.
And as a confessed homosexual in love with Worrell, could Miller passively watch or even walk away while his lover is having sex with women?
Oh, he was there 100%. No way could one person hold her back. No way. I don't believe a word he says.
I don't think that 7 young women are so easily coerced into by a smooth-talking fellow with a fellow nearly twice his age.
As to James Miller's level of participation in these terrible crimes, who's right and who's wrong, we may never know. The answer most likely remains forever hidden, woven somewhere in the fabric that makes up the story of good versus evil. Whatever the truth, the facts are 7 girls were brutally murdered.
And I believe that he's just passing a lot of the blame and it just doesn't wash with me.
The most important thing that people should understand, if they've got any doubts about what this enterprise was all about, they should go up to Truro. It's a long way to Truro. It's a long drive to nowhere.
When you got out of your car and went for your walks, you didn't hear a thing.
No. No, not a thing.